What if I told you a simple management strategy could increase the number of calves born during the day? It's true, and for those calving soon, you won't want to miss this next interview. So what's the strategy, you might be asking? It's feeding cows at dusk. A University of Nebraska-Lincoln Cow-Calf Specialist joined us earlier in the studio to shed a light on this opportunity. Joining us today to talk about using evening feeding to increase daytime calving is Kacie McCarthy, a UNL Cow-Calf Specialist. Kacie, thank you very much for the time. We sure appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll talk about the study behind this. How does this work and what's the research into it?
Yes, so this idea, the Cow-Calf feeding method, really started with a rancher out in Manitoba. And he started feeding his cows in the evening time and started noticing changes in the time for when his cows started calving. And so there's been several studies around Nebraska that have looked at this concept. Iowa has a great study with 1,331 cows. 15 different producers were really trying to get those numbers there, and they started feeding in the evening, so around 4 to 6 p.m. or so, and noticed that almost 85% of those cows in that study started calving and shifting calving towards 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So really trying to consolidate that time and labor component with just a little shift in feeding time right before calving.
There's some obvious benefits to that. No one likes waking up in the middle of the night to check on calves. Talk about the advantages of kind of tightening that calving window.
Yeah, so, as we think about maybe some options, during the calving time, sleep is one of them, right? And so when we start to think of that evening shift for feeding, now we're starting to shift that rumination time in those cows. And so I would still encourage folks to go out and do a couple midnight checks with those cows, because there are, studies where we do see a couple cows here and there that don't read the book and want to start calving a little later into the night. But it also helps that management standpoint of I can get some things done during the day and being able to check those cows where you've got light, you've got an opportunity. If you have issues, you can call the vet or somebody, and it's not an emergency midnight call.
Is this something where you want to start to transition your cattle a little bit ahead of time before the calving window hits?
Yes, absolutely. So the theory here is starting at least 2 to 3 weeks prior to calving. If you can start later than that, so a month or two before, that really starts to shift that rumination pattern in those females, and then ultimately can help start to shift that kind of physiological effect that we also see within those cows.
Let's talk about what we're feeding cattle. Any sort of dietary things that have been studied when it comes to the calving window?
Yes, so as we move into calving, making sure we're meeting those cows' requirements. So we're going to start to ramp up, especially with lactation. And so making sure that those cows are in good body condition. We like to target that 5 or 6 on that 9-point scale, especially with our heifers, getting a little more closer to that 6 or maybe even 7, just to make sure that as we move into that lactation demand and calving, that's a lot of stress going into that process. And so that recovery time before that breeding season is really ideal to make sure we're meeting those requirements. So energy and protein, those start to increase anyway when we start to move into cold weather and winter time, like we're kind of facing now. And so as we move into calving, it's always really strong and encourage folks to be looking at their feed resources, knowing what they're providing, and making sure we're meeting those requirements.
You shared with me this concept of evening feeding has gained a little momentum. People have realized there's some science behind this, and as you mentioned, it actually works when you study this. What do you hear from producers as they try this? What's some of the feedback you've heard?
Yeah, so I love talking about this in class, and I have students who are like, oh, I didn't know it had a name. We do this, at home. And a lot of really positive feedback. They see that shift, right? From a management standpoint, if you've got extra help or labor, right, that they can go out, go provide that mixed ration, or maybe they're feeding just hay, right, in the evening, but we're providing that feed in the evening, anywhere from about 4 to 6, 5 to 7, after work if we're working off ranch or farm. But then that helps really shift that time for folks to be able to get other chores and things done, and then be able to go check on those cows and shift that calving time.
I assume if people want to learn more online, you've got some resources published.
Yes, absolutely. So beef.unl.edu is a great resource. We have a lot of different calving management resources right now and videos that are getting pushed out as we think about calving season that's approaching, thinking about nutrition requirements, chatting with your local extension educator or specialist. We're here to help make sure that we're on target for meeting those cows' requirements and any additional resources that they need during calving.
While we have you here in the studio, I want to bring up a topic addressed earlier this week. There was Zoom discussion talking about managing mud. That's something a lot of producers are dealing with right now, particularly in feedlots, but managing mud is something we'll have to face when it comes to calving season as well, isn't it?
Yes, so mud with the warm-up that we've had this week has definitely been an issue for folks where maybe our January and February calvers are usually used to maybe frozen ground. It's a little different challenge this year. And so as we think about herd health, calf health, I'm going to steer a little bit towards that cow-calf side, but even in the feedlots as well, making sure that those navels are dry on our calves. We can provide maybe some type of bedding to get those calves out of the mud. That's just going to increase that reduction in health and other issues that we might be seeing. On the feedlot side, right, we can start to see impacts in feed intake, and so really making sure that we're managing the mud as much as we can, keeping pens clean or having a spot for those animals to try and get out of the really thick stuff as best we can.